Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. Today, we are going through the Gospel of John. We are on chapter 9. The format today is we're going to have two readings of the entire chapter, and then we're going to dive deeply, just directly into Aquinas Commentary. I've selected only a very short part of Aquinas Commentary, and we're going to be talking about it. The good thing about this chapter is that it's an integrated whole. It's just one story. So we'll be talking about the story as a whole. We'll start with Aquinas Commentary, then we'll open it up for comments from everybody. So we're going to start with chapter 9. We'll start first reading by Penny. Penny, which edition you're reading in from?
This is the Standard Revised Version.
Wonderful. Go ahead.
A man born blind received sight. As they walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work in the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." The blind men and the Pharisees. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. The blind man and Jesus. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains."
Wonderful. Thank you. We're going to have one more reading by Evanik, and then we're going to go to Aquinas Commentary. Then we'll open it up for comments from everybody. So Evanik.
Jesus heals a man born, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Jesus heals a man born blind. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. "Rabbi," his disciples asked him, "why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?" "This was not because of his sins or his parents' sins," Jesus answered. "This happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world." Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, "Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said he was, and others said, "No, he just looks like him." But the beggar kept saying, "Yes, I am the same one." They asked, "Who healed you? What happened?" He told them, "The man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, 'Go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself.' So I went and washed, and now I can see." "Where is he now?" they asked. "I don't know," he replied. Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, "He put the mud over my eyes, and then I washed it away. I could see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man Jesus is not from God, for he is working on the Sabbath." Others said, "But how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs?" So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, "What is your opinion about this man who healed you?" The man replied, "I think he must be a prophet." The Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man who had been blind and could now see, so they called his parents. They asked him, "Is this your son? Was he born blind? If so, how can he now see?" His parents replied, "We know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He is old enough to speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, "He is old enough. Ask him." So for the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, "God should get the glory for this, because we know that this man Jesus is a sinner." "I don't know whether he is a sinner," the man replied, "but I know this. I was blind and now I can see." "But what did he do?" they asked. "How did he heal you?" "Look," The man exclaimed, I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they cursed him and said, you are his disciples, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he could not have done it. You were born a total sinner, they answered. Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue. Then Jesus heard what happened, and he found the man and asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? The man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. You have seen him, Jesus said, and he is speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said, and he worshiped Jesus. Then Jesus told him, I entered the world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and show those who think they see that they are blind. Some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, are you saying we are blind? If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, Jesus replied. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ebony. You know what? I want to give a chance for people to talk about this chapter as a whole for a few minutes, just overall comments of what do you get from this chapter? And then we will dive into Aquinas commentary. Aquinas commentary on this chapter was fairly short. Last chapter, his commentary was about 50 pages. This chapter was only about 15 pages. And I've been able to boil it down to about 4 pages because I've selected only the last paragraph and his comments on that. So that's what we'll be focusing on. But I want to give a chance for first to people to talk about this idea of being blind and seeing. I have to, Joe is the first one who has volunteered, but what I want to do is I want to disagree with him first, because he said yesterday, he made a point yesterday that I was very quick at applying the form follows function principle. And I wanted to show him how wrong he was, because I had 3 minutes at the end to talk about the 4 meetups, these 4 meetups, including this one. And I thought I did a decent job of telling people what the meetup was, but this is what I should have said. This meetup is really about the difference between being focused on the form or function. You're either focused on your spirit, the core of you, or you're focused on the periphery. People who are focused on the periphery can see only the things in the periphery, and they're blind to the spirit. They don't see it. And people who see the spirit and live by it are considered to be blind by those who are focused only on the periphery. So this issue of sight and blindness that this entire chapter is talking about is about, do you consider function to be primary or the form to be primary? This is what I should have said, but I was not quick enough to say it. But sorry to disagree with you, Joe, but the floor is yours now. What do you think of the chapter?
Well, I'm going to take much better notes as to when you do apply it quickly, so then I can counter that point. So, you know, everybody has a moment where they're off. I think that this is perhaps one of the more straightforward passages as far as understanding it, and that's probably why Thomas Aquinas's, you know, commentary is 25 pages versus 50. But it's essentially that, you know, we're living that in a world of sin. And essentially that it's a spiritual blindness that exists amongst leaders of the time. And I think that that blindness is that let me back up as well, because one of the things that Christ has done throughout the Gospels is he's actually demonstrated he's evangelized through miracles. And I think that that's a very important point, because it's people that have faith that then can be healed. And because then that gets back to the idea of grace as well. The center and the periphery as well applies, where you're looking inward and you're kind of saying to yourself what really matters and how do I live up to the ideals that essentially what it means to be virtuous, as opposed to living up to the ideals of the laws of that time. And we've spoken in the past how, essentially Judaism is a religion of laws, not necessarily, and it incorporates virtue into that, but it's something focused more on laws, not necessarily sin per se. So when we talk about the idea of sin, then what does that mean? That means that you're hurting your fellow man, that you're doing something wrong, you're going against nature, you're going against your core and who your ideal self. So that, and I really think you did put it nicely, albeit a day later, that what are you really focused on the forms or the functions? And I think that this is a very clear example, as is the whole Gospel of John. Those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Evanique, Enro, Penny, and Maritza. Evanique.
Yeah, so I know you said you're going to go over the last chapter, Sharikant, but I did get a chance to read most of the commentaries, and I have some thoughts. Because one of the things that stood out for me was in lecture 1, where Aquinas talks about who is blind, and blind, he says it's the human race, it's man. And then sin is spiritual blindness. Therefore, they asked whether he had been born blind, or that part where he's been born blind. And to me, I really just didn't look at it like that, because in a sense, we're all born blind, right? Like spiritually blind. And now we can see, right? And so that's what made the question ironic when his disciples asked that, is that they were like, well, is it because he sinned? Well, there was no way he sinned. He was born blind. There was no sin to be done. And in a sense, was it the sin of his parents? Well, no. So so why was he born blind? And one part of Aquinas's commentary, he says, God sometimes imposes physical punishments or difficulties and external consequences as a beneficial remedy of the soul. And so when that part where he says he was made born blind so that you could see the glory of God, I never understood that until I read Aquinas. And I don't know if I necessarily even agree with it, but I can see it. And where the Aquinas commentary goes into is the part about Sodom and Gomorrah, and people always ask, well, why were the children killed? And Aquinas was saying that the children were killed so that spiritually they wouldn't have to suffer. So I was just like, okay, I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but okay, it's not me to agree with, right? And then the part about the spinning, like I was like, you think of spinning, you think, oh, right? And then I was thinking, why does he spit? And so when Aquinas talks about it, he talks about Christ used his body to show that the body is an instrument of the divine. And that's when human and divine really clicked for me, because, if our body is an instrument of the divine, that means there's like a partnership there. that our spirit is using our body. And in one part of the commentary, he talks about how the soul doesn't exist until the body is born. And I never heard that before. I just thought, you existed and then you came into the body. But he was like, the soul doesn't exist until the body does, because I guess the soul has to go somewhere. So I just never thought about that. And then the last part I think I'm going to talk about is where he talks about in a commentary, it looks like you are trying not to pay attention. Where he talks about the blind man talking to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees keep asking him the same thing, and he gets frustrated. And he says, it looks like you're not paying attention to what I'm saying. So I have nothing further to say. Like, I'm done. It's like he's done. And I thought about the passage in Matthew 7:16. It says, don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. They will trample the pearls and turn and attack you. And when I thought of this, I was like, well, that one was kind of hard to get. But what I got was that when you tell people something, like when you're giving people advice, or, you're just trying to tell them something that's good for them, they may not be ready for it. And I think that's what was happening here with a lot of the Pharisees. They were not ready to hear that Christ was the Messiah, because then they would have to change. I think we were talking about that last night with form follows function, and why, people hold on to form so much. This is a classic example. And I think because sometimes people aren't ready to do it. They're not ready to do the change. They're not ready to repent, really. They really just are holding on for comfort and for high places and for power. And in this instance, the Pharisees were a particularly powerful sect of Judaism. So if they believe in Christ, that means they have to yield that power to Christ. That means they no longer hold high places in society. Like, if you think about it, who wants to give that up, really? So I was just thinking about that. So those were my thoughts based on the Aquinas reading.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Evanik, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing Aquinas in. And I invite anybody who reads Aquinas Commentary to bring that in, because always it's very illuminating. Thank you. Next up is Enro, followed by Penny. Enro.
Upon this reading of the entire passage of chapter 9, verse 35 caught my attention simply because, the second part of the verse says, do you believe in the Son of, and here's where different translations vary. Some had this quoted as, do you believe in the Son of Man? But other translations put it, do you believe in the Son of God? And there's a footnote in my version, which happens to be the NKJV, that says that one ancient text uses Son of Man, and there's another one, somewhat, I think, more later. Well, which one is the later ancient manuscript that has Son of God? And so, but the one that Evanik, for example, read had this, do you believe in the Son of Man? My version has, do you believe in the Son of God? And I think the first one that Penny read also had, do you believe in the Son of Man? So this divergence, this between the title where God, where Jesus refers, this is a self-referencing of Jesus to himself. And why one thing theologically, why there might be, why it's understandable that there be this divergence among the translations, is that theologically it was determined, for example, in the Council of Nicaea, I believe, that Jesus had both the full nature of a human and simultaneously the full nature of God. Now, what is that? Now, the full nature of God, although as Avnik had mentioned, we as humans do have certainly a spiritual essence, but that's not the same thing as being an incarnation of God, having the nature of God. In other words, at the start of John's book, at chapter 1, the notion of Jesus as pre-existing as God at the very beginning, being the so-called word or the logos, which is the Greek term, which means the structure or the essence of God at the beginning. I think we find that the two different types of translations in our English Bibles that has the Son of God reflects this notion of Jesus being having a dual nature of being an incarnation of God. Now, incidentally, I understand that. Well, I've seen some of the 52 living ideas on the subject of Hinduism. And although I haven't followed that as readily as regularly as I followed this one on chapter of John, I understand that the idea of incarnation of God is quite inherent, an ingredient, and implicit to Hinduism. There's not just one incarnation of God, as I understand it. There are some, perhaps just four. Perhaps there are as many as four.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate that. And I think in my reading of the Bible, and certainly my reading of Gita, this idea of integration of spirit and matter is crucial. That the idea that Jesus is 100% God and 100% man, that Krishna is God and is man at the same time. I think that is a crucial part, because it's the integration of the two, that they are that at the same time. That's a huge point, which is a dramatically different idea than the idea of the Platonic idea of having two separate worlds. Next up is going to be Penny, followed by
I just want to make a remark.
Go ahead.
To emphasize, to comment on your statement. I do think it's important to recognize the distinction between an incarnation of God and a human, such as we believe, who are us Christian, or those who identify themselves as Christians believe Jesus was, and the spiritual aspect of the normal human being as they live as we live in this world. A spiritual, the incarnation, for example, extends to God as being his omniscient and omnipotent and totally beneficent character, which is still ingredient to an incarnation, whereas we don't have that completely. We have a spiritual aspect to it. But the spiritual aspect that we have as regular humans would not be the same thing as the total incarnation of God. I think I just want to make that distinction.
I understand you're making, I mean, certainly Hinduism does not make the distinction. Hinduism, the basic idea is Tattvamasi. So it's a very large point. And how exactly is spirit and matter connected to each other? How is form and function connected to each other? What is the nature of the integration is a humongous point. And thank you for bringing that up. Next up is Penny, followed by Maritza. Penny.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment a little bit on how compelling this story is, because Jesus made a blind man see, and then when they took him to the Pharisees, You know, they were questioning him, and they didn't believe. They made his parents come because they couldn't believe that he actually had been given sight by Jesus. And then when they brought him the second time, the blind man who could now see basically gave a validation of the beliefs of the Christians. He told them what the Pharisees should have seen, you know, that he had done something that nobody had ever done in history, and that God didn't listen to sinners. God only listened to people who worshiped him and believed in him. And so this person, you know, he doesn't know who Jesus was, but he said, surely he came from God, basically, because he of what he did. And then the Pharisees, you know, of course, came out and said, basically, you were born in sin, because, you know, Christianity has the idea of original sin. So everybody's born in sin. But of course, the Pharisees were also born in sin. I mean, you know, everybody is. So then they said, well, you were born in sin. Are you trying to teach us? And actually, he really was trying to teach them. He was explaining exactly what happened and basically the proof of it based on their religion. But they refused to accept that. And I just think that's very compelling that, you know, a simple soul knew the basics of his religion. He was a spiritual being. He said, oh, but look, you know, A, B, C, it adds up to C. I mean, this guy has to be like a prophet, where the Pharisees would have none of it.
It's beautiful, beautiful point. The simple soul knew the core of the religion, whereas the learned people are full of rituals, cover themselves with text, but have lost the touch with the meaning itself. Thank you. Next up is Maritza, followed by Kate. Maritza.
I'm delighted to go after Penny because some of my thinking was a little bit in similar vein. If I were looking at this section from a perspective of, if we're taking a step back from the religion aspect of it and looking at it in a slightly more philosophical nature, what are we seeing here? What are we being shown? And what it comes to mind for me, this story is the idea of a seeker of truth, and maybe an internal and a community struggle for this understanding, right? So the distinction between knowledge and understanding is what I'm seeing here, because when we think of somebody who was blind at birth, it can be stated that all of us in some way, we are blind at birth. And it does require us to strive towards understanding of certain aspects of our everyday in order to achieve some type of sight. So I see that here. And I think, I do like to tell people everyone needs a philosophy, no judgment on what your philosophy tends to be, right? So if it's not a religion thing, I really enjoy looking at something like this from that angle. And what I see here is that we're being told, okay, if we are to be following some type of a philosophy, maybe your internal set of values and codes, the striving, the humbleness to realize that there are facets that you may not understand, that's the first step, I think, towards allowing yourself to reach the state of seeing. So here in this parable, what I find to be most fascinating is that Jesus reveals himself to this previously blind man, not right away. He reveals to him to himself after, and at the exclusion of the Pharaohs. It would clear up so much, because when you first read this, it's so frustrating, because you're like, come on, Jesus, you can set all these people straight. if you just reveal yourself to these pharaohs, why are you playing coy and shy? But then when you take a step and you consider the purpose of the parable from a philosophical perspective, it's that learning moment. The idea that if things are revealed to those who have not yet attained understanding, they will still be unable to view it. So, and we can even think about this in something like mundane, like mathematics. You're not going to start somebody with calculus. You need to make sure they have a good grasp on algebra first, because if you just throw calculus on them, they're going to forever be lost. So I was thinking that that's what we're being shown here, the idea of this one blind man in acknowledging that he was blind and now he can see. He's showing to us those steps forward that one must make in investigating our philosophy, and that through that search for understanding and seeking of truth, that's where it's going to be revealed to us what would be like, the golden concept, or like the Messiah, as it were. And that if there is something that is eluding us, if we find ourselves in the position of the pharaohs, then that should be an indicator to us that we still have some learning to do. We are, negating something that is in front of us. I mean, obviously the man standing in front of them was no longer blind. Even the parents are like, he used to be blind. So they're negating that because they're not yet reached a point. So if we find ourselves in the position of the pharaohs, we may need to regroup, reconsider, and strive a little bit more, maybe, shift where you're walking and walk a slightly different path in hopes that you attain a spot where you now can become, the one who was blind and now sees.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'll comment on two things. I mean, one of the principles that is there throughout is ask and you shall receive. So you have to actually ask. If a person doesn't ask, so this is a difference, when he goes and talks to woman from Samaria. Just before that, he's been talking to all these Pharisees. And even when they were asking, they were actually not asking. They did not really want to know. So a person needs to want to know for him to actually learn anything. So that's first principle. The second thing that I find really remarkable about this story is that this man remains true to whatever he knows. Like, I could not see, and now with this, I can see. Now, and it's a fact that he knows, and he keeps on pointing that out to anybody who wants, even when they are refusing to just acknowledge the fact. In various ways, very simply, he's reiterating what he knows. Thank you. Next up is Kate, Brian, and Katie. Kate.
So I wanted to talk about when they're asking about, why is this man blind, and like, has he sinned or his parents have sinned? And he says that he was made blind so that the works of God might be made visible through him. And I feel like that's an age-old question, like, why are bad things happening to good people, etc. And in the beginning, it feels like that, like, why would God do that? But then if we think about, like, in our daily life, we do that to ourselves to accomplish things that we want, right? So like, you look at an athlete, like, it's really hard to, work hard, whether it's to become an athlete or academic study, whatever it is. It's very uncomfortable. It's hard. It's pain. But through that, you will achieve some kind of excellence in whatever area you're looking for. So I feel like this is similar in that way, that, that in order maybe to be more compassionate or be more faithful or more just like a good person, this is a way that God kind of guides you in that way, right? And then, like, if God is good and we're trying to have a quality that God has, then who else is to guide you then if not God, through like things to put on your path, right? And even though we were made in the image of God, we're not there yet. So clearly we have work to do. And I think that's what it means in the end when it says that I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see might see. So it's like presenting the information to people who might not have heard of it, but then also says those who do see might become blind, meaning it's kind of like the Pharisees that now that they know, they think maybe they don't really say it like consciously, but like they are God in a way that like, I know better than God. Now I know everything. And I think that's just like, echoes to be, you want to be open and learn, and whatever comes your way, that is, even though it might seem like a hardship from God, it is really a tool for you to become closer to God.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Yesterday we were talking about the phenomena of birth. Any kind of birth or any kind of rebirth is painful because you have to give up things that you're used to, things that are comfortable, things that you took for granted for a long time, and you have to give all of that up in order to create something new. That's how all new things come to be. That is what the idea of sacrifice is about, of saying that I'm going to give up things which are not leading to the center, which are in the periphery, so that I can build the center. And it is painful, but it is through that, and you can see it in spades here. This man, because discovery of being able to see when he was born blind is such a profound transformation that he has now the confidence in his sight, in the sight of Jesus, the right path, the truth, of a kind which is incredibly more powerful than people who have eyes throughout but cannot see. He can see not just physically, but spiritually at the same time. Thank you. Next up is Brian, followed by Katie. Brian.
I wanted to comment in general about the chapter. I think Jesus again is confounding the establishment in what he does and the words he speaks. For example, someone mentioned earlier, sorry, I don't remember who did that. Someone spoke about the Son of Man, and it could have been the Son of God. Yes, you could say that. We could have said that, and maybe he did. He also could have said the Son of Abraham. I am a son of Abraham. And that is what the Pharisees had said in earlier chapters when they're asserting their authority and they're asserting their understanding and their truth. They say, we are sons of Abraham. He comes back and says, I am the Son of Man. And one interpretation of the Son of Man, you can go around on that, but one clear interpretation on the Son of Man in Hebrew tradition, as I understand it, is the son of Adam. So Jesus is saying, I'm the son of Adam. So he's not contradicting. He can still be a son of Abraham, but he's putting emphasis on the fact that he's the son of Adam, like all men, instead of a son of Abraham, like all of the Israelites. So that's confounding their thinking a bit there. And also, the thing that I think confounds their thinking in this chapter, and also in the chapter 5, where he heals the lame man, is not that he heals the man, because this kind of healing was going on a lot in the Middle East, in the Eastern Mediterranean at that time. And it had been going on for a long time, and it was well accepted and respected and recognized. there is indication in this chapter 9, he's the first to heal a blind man, from a person blind from birth. But at the end, the Pharisees accept that based on the testimony that he did, that this was a man blind from birth and now he is healed, and that Jesus intervened. The thing that I think they're having trouble with is that he did it on the Sabbath, just like the last time. And again, it comes back to that point that makes him a sinner. So they state very clearly in this, they can state with certainty, and they do state with certainty in this chapter, Jesus, we know this man is a sinner. What do you say? That's what this word here, the words, I'm trying to find it now. Give glory to God. In my Bible notes here, it says that was it's like an oath asking. It was the officials, the Pharisees, asking this man to give an oath to tell the truth. And so they were saying to him, tell the truth. And then they say right away, according to this John's gospel, we know he's a sinner. So they're not unbiased. We know he's a sinner. And they say that because he cured you on a Sunday. And and he said, I don't know about that, but I know he cured me. And so they're confounded, not by the cure in the end, but by the fact that it happened on a Sunday. And that to them, it's impossible then that he could have done that through the power of God, because God does not work through sinners. God does not work through people on Sundays. And that's just, that was another confounding element. Jesus is coming to them constantly with new paradigms that include, and in some ways are consistent with the Jewish tradition, but go beyond that tradition. And I think that's what a lot of these people are struggling with.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Katie, Becky, and David. Katie.
I was going to say something similar to Kate, with that being the justification why a lot of people don't believe with the why does suffering happen to good people. So I had two related points to that. And one is that whenever I see something terrible happening, I do agree with the Bible that you will see people doing good deeds even in terrible situations. Like, someone's getting hijacked and someone says, hey, take me, like exchange me, and you'll see people doing good deeds in the face of difficult situation. And then the second one is kind of a reflection on sin. I think nowadays the idea that like something that your parents did would have an impact on you as a sin on you. We definitely probably don't see it like sin is transferable from one person to another person. Like, you should be responsible for your own actions and had to have done something yourself rather than something in your family or something in your ethnic group. I think most people today would, like, for example, like thinking, like, I caught myself in a reflection the other day where I was judging someone for her mom's marriage. And I was like, no, she's her own person. I shouldn't judge her by her mom. She makes her own decisions. And, there's no reason why you have to follow in the path of your parent. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next up is Becky, followed by David. Becky.
I think the first thing I want to say is that it's amazing how it doesn't matter where you start off. And as long as you're genuinely searching, God will meet you where you are. And to your point, what you mentioned earlier about like all these learned people who could not see, but then someone who was disadvantaged and very limited in his education and understanding because of his own physical handicap, like he could see. It's not about where you start off. And I really wish I attended that form follows function meetup yesterday, because I have a lot of questions too, like why is it that people hold on to the form? I think Ebony had brought up like comfort as one of them, and what Brian had mentioned about like, I don't know if he's a sinner, but this is what is, and for the Pharisees to still hold on to like, no, he's a sinner, contrary to what the facts are, and a apparent contradiction. It's like they so refuse to try to reconcile that contradiction by looking outside. Perhaps it's their assumption that's wrong, and so moving beyond that system in order to incorporate something else could possibly reconcile that, like moving from form to function. But they're just held on to their presuppositions through their pride. Like, and I think it comes back to the fact that they're so learned, but it's their pride that props them up, that prevents them from seeing, because they can't let that go. It's I'm smarter, I know, I've studied this from birth, and it's pride just has this power of deceiving, and when you think you know everything, you stop trying to seek the truth, because the truth is you don't, and no one can. So
wonderful. Thank you, Becky. I want to make a couple of points here. The first one is a more general point that keeps happening across all these chapters of Jesus using the material to point to the spiritual. We saw it in chapter 4 with living water. Living water as love at the core of your being. Then we saw in chapter 5 or 6, I'm the bread of life. Bread, physical bread versus spiritual bread. Then we looked at the concept of life itself as physical life versus spiritual life. Then we looked at light. Again, we are seeing sight here as physical sight and spiritual sight. What is happening so it's the same pattern that is being repeated. Here, this is a very interesting example of that form and function here. And the Sabbath is not accidental. It is all about, if the core argument of Jesus is to go back to the function, go back to your spirit, look at your spirit. All the forms, all the rituals, all the things, the physical rituals that you have were actually designed to support the spirit. And you're holding on to those things. And this is a very clear example. Here, a person who could not see can see now. Clearly something dramatic has happened. The person obviously is focused on that. And he is not only is now seeing the physical world, but he's also seeing the power of the spirit, because it has given, that spirit has given him the sight. So he is at once seeing that. Like one of the things he says when he meets, after Jesus puts the mud, he goes off to this lake, and there he washes and he comes back. So he has not seen Jesus yet. When he sees Jesus, he says, I would like to see. And Jesus says, you are seeing him. Okay, so he's seeing Jesus. So he's seeing, first he has seen the world, and he has seen Jesus. He has seen the spirit that shapes the world. And that's what he is seeing. And what everybody, all these Pharisees are doing is that even though they have seen, they can see with their own eyes that this person was blind, now he can see, something has happened. They are ignoring it. They are refusing to see it consistently. So thank you. Next up is David Norton.
Yeah, a very interesting chapter. And to me, it just carries over from the previous one at chapter 8. But the thing is, last week, I ended up attending your Gita, or whatever it is, class on Friday. And the thing is, I couldn't help but notice, and even hearing you talk before, of the similarity between the Gita and the words of Jesus Christ. To me, they're almost synonymous. And when I look at the events of what we were going over last week, compared to the events of Jesus Christ, the only thing that's different is the words that they use. Much of the same understanding really sort of comes out in two different ways. And what I'd like to do now is sort of use one of those understandings that I got from last week, which was, the thing is, I think that there was talking, especially that fellow that you had on there, that guy was brilliant. I really have a lot of respect for him. But the thing is that came across there was that in order to go from the outer to the inner, okay, is something that people had to experience. It's not something that, it just doesn't happen through somebody telling you about this or that, but it's the experience. And the thing is, the way I look at this thing here and looking at the event in itself is that there's an experience here that the fellow that was blind experienced. And the thing is, nobody could take and persuade him from anything that he believed about it. The Pharisees with their traditions and laws and everything. I mean, the thing is, he experienced. So he's right there. He's done it. I mean, it's part of his life now, And the thing is, just through circumstance and everything, he identifies Jesus Christ as being responsible for this experience happening in his life. And the thing is, all of a sudden, because of this experience, this man has transitioned from being blind to being able to see. And that there is, to me, what is this whole little story is all about. Because the thing is, the people of the Pharisees, their only experience that they have was living in their traditions. And that's all they can see. That's all they can hear. And they can't understand, that somebody could go through this change of experience through the touch and the spirit of another man, which is Jesus Christ. And the thing is, you can get on all the little, anomalies, I guess, of what's in there and talk about them. But to me, overall, what got put into this fellow's mind was the experience of Jesus Christ. And to me, that happens to people in their lives. Once they do the experience and have the experience, nobody can take that away from them, So I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's do one thing. I'm going to start with Aquinas now. I've chosen only one paragraph because I want to show what Aquinas can do. By the way, just fantastic comments, everybody. So what I've done is that I've just picked the last, 35 to 41 of Aquinas. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Because he's not seen him yet. Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who speaks to you." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this, and they said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you are blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." So I'm going to read the commentary, and I'm going to stop at various points and ask for any comments on the commentary. Give me just a second. Let me make sure I can see the chats here. Okay. All right. After the evangelist showed how the Jews cast out the man born blind because he persisted in the truth, he here shows how Jesus received him and taught him. So he was cast out. That's first, he just saw the truth, refused to give up the truth that he saw with his own eyes, and he was cast out. And now Jesus, let's see what he's doing. First, we see Christ teaching him. Secondly, the devotion of the man born blind. Thirdly, the approval of his devotion. He does three things about the first. First, he shows the eagerness of Christ to teach him. Secondly, we see the desire of the man born blind to believe. Thirdly, the teaching of the faith is given to perfect him. Just a second. Okay. Christ's eagerness to teach is described in three ways. First, by his attentive consideration to what was done to the man born blind. For just as a trainer carefully considers what his athlete undergoes for his sake, so Christ attentively considered what the man born blind underwent for the sake of the truth and because of his assertions. And so he says that Jesus heard, attentively considered, that Pharisees had cast him out of the temple. Secondly, we see Christ's eagerness from his efforts in searching for him. For the evangelist says, having found him. So this is what I love about Aquinas Commentary, that he shows you the intentions behind, or ideas behind each part of the story. For we are said to find what we diligently seek. She seeks diligently until she finds it. It is clear from this that Christ was looking for him alone because he found more faith in him alone than the others. And we can see from this that God loves one just person more than 10,000 sinners. Thirdly, our Lord's eagerness is seen from seriousness of his question. He said, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" The blind man was an image of those to be baptized. So now he's showing us, this is an example of the kind of approach you can have towards truth. Thus, the custom arose in the church of questioning those to be baptized about their faith. So it has to, you have to say something. Baptism now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a clean conscience. So it's not a surface. This is the distinction between baptizing with water that John is doing, John the Baptist is doing, of removal of sins, giving up of sins. But this is doing something positive from the core of your being, of saying yes to truth. Next, he mentions the desire of the man born blind to believe. We have to recall that this man had not yet physically seen Christ, for he had not seen him when Christ anointed his eyes and sent him to the pool of Siloam. And when he wanted to go back to him, he was detained by the Pharisees and the Jews. However, although he had not physically seen Jesus, he believed that the one who opened his eyes was the Son of God. And so he breaks out in the words of desire and intense longing and says, "And who is he, sir?" Namely the Son of God, "who opened my eyes, that I may believe in him." So this is again a very crucial point of a person asking for God, asking for truth on his own, that intense desire, that love. Because as we read in wisdom, she, that is wisdom, goes about seeking those worthy of her. Christ reveals himself to the man born blind who desired her when he says, "You have seen him, and it is he who speaks to you." Here, Christ is giving him a teaching of faith. First, he mentions the gift he received, saying, "You have seen him." That is, you did not see him before, have now seen him. He's saying, in effect, that the man was born blind, received the ability to see from him. Blessed are the eyes which see what you see. Secondly, the teaching itself is given when he says, "It is he who speaks to you." Then the evangelist says, he said, "Lord, I believe." We see the devout faith of the man born blind. And first, he professes with his lips the faith in his heart. You can see this is completely consistent with all his actions thus far, saying, "Lord, I believe." Man believes with his heart and so is justified. And he confesses with his lips and so is saved. Secondly, he shows it in his conduct and worshiped him. Next, the devotion of the man born blind is commended. First, his devotion is commended. Secondly, we see the grumbling of the Jews. And then they answered. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for a moment and see if anybody has any comments so far. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to comment on anything that was said so far. Start with Joe.
My comments really quickly. Do you believe in the Son of God? Where he's asking them, and he's, basically, I find that to be a really important and reoccurring theme throughout the Gospel of John, is that it's stating that essentially that faith and belief in truth is universally accessible to everyone. So if you believe in me, then you have that opportunity to follow God and to be in the light. And I think that that's really shows you what the power of faith is. The second reoccurring theme is the idea of wisdom and seeking wisdom, is that you're also seeking the truth, where you're not necessarily just allowing current rituals to dictate what you believe, essentially, or what you're essentially, it's not dictating your belief in God, or you're not believing in the forms, as we've talked about. Those are just some, the accessibility factor, I think, is really the most important thing that's a recurring thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the point about asking,
Right.
Jesus always asks. Even the person the lame person he's healing, he says, do you want to be healed? And, it's like the person has to say, yes, I want to be healed. Yes, right. I want this. And only if a person wants it from the core of his being, then they can get it. Next up is Douglas.
The whole thing is love heals, and to understand that it's all about love. And when he starts to believe in Jesus and the whole thing, then he can see again, because he was blind until he understood the love of Jesus.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. All right. I'm going to go to the next part. Okay. The man born blind is commended for his faith. We read, for judgment I came into this world. For Jesus came to distinguish the good from the evil. The words which follow show this, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. According to Augustine, give me just a second. Sorry about that. Okay. According to Augustine, those who think they see do not see, and those who do not think they see. Now, we are said to be blind spiritually insofar as we sin. See, again, this is about seeing as being applied to spirit. This is the same pattern that we've seen before. Their wickedness blinded them. So we are said to be blind spiritually insofar as we sin. Thus, the one who does not recognize his own sins regards himself as seeing, while one who recognizes himself as a sinner regards himself as not seeing. See, again, you can look at it in terms of the center and periphery here. Anybody whose eyes are fixed on the center can notice that they are going away from the center, which is what sin is. Anybody whose eyes are not focused on the center, they have no ability actually to know, to see that they are going away from the center. So the spiritual sight is, being able to, and that's what is meaning, that if you're blind to the center, if you're not seeing the center, if you're not focused on the core of you, if you're not focused on the truth, if you're not focused on the good, if you're not focused on God, all of it, give me just a second here. Okay. If you're not focused on all of that, then you're blind. So it's a question of what are you focused on? The center? Are you focused on the center or not? Seeing spiritually is standing in the light, standing in the center, being focused on the center, concentrating on the center. The first characteristic of the proud. First is the characteristic of the proud. The second of the humble. So if you are focused on the center, then you're aware that you are not there yet, that you keep going away from it. and you're humble in that respect. So the more you see, the more you know that you are blind. And if not, you're proud because you have no reference point of the center. So the meaning is this: I have come to distinguish the humble from the proud, so that the humble who do not see, that is, who regard themselves as sinners, may see, having been illuminated by faith. And those who see, that is the proud, may become blind, that is, may remain in darkness. So again, this is the use of the concept of light. You know, in the last chapter, we talked about standing in the light. And that's the same as standing in the center, or to be focused on God. So if you're not standing in the light, if you are only in the periphery, you're just reacting to what is around you, then you remain in darkness. You remain blind spiritually. He adds that those who do not see, that is the Gentiles, who lacked the light of divine knowledge. See here again, the comment that Penny made, that this was a very simple man, who was not learned, who did not know all the scriptures. So that those who do not see, that is the Gentiles who lacked the light of divine knowledge, may see, that is, be admitted to the knowledge of God. And the people who walked in darkness have seen great light. And those who see, the Jews who did have the knowledge of God. So this is what he's distinguishing between, is the rituals. So even when you had religion, but held it in ritual form, who you were supposed to have that. You were supposed to know God, but all you have is the rituals. That those who see, and you can see Pharisees are saying, look, we are the ones who see. We know the right. We know God. We know Jesus is sinner because he's doing these on the Sabbath. So they are actually saying that we see, and we see based on the rituals that we have. And he said, so that's why he's saying that those who see, the Jews who did have the knowledge of God, may become blind, that is, fall away from the knowledge of God. So this is again giving up the forms and getting to the function. There is, in New Testament, it is kind of movement inside, inward movement, and trying to get at the truth that is at the core of you. The Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it. Now we see the grumbling of the Jews. They had understood our Lord's words in a bodily sense because they had seen the man born blind physically restored to sight, and had thought that our Lord was concerned only with the light in his eyes rather than in his mind. And so they believed that he was warning and threatening them with physical blindness when he said, may become blind. Therefore, the evangelist says, some of the Pharisees near him heard this, the above words. And he says, were near him to show their vacillation. For sometimes they were with him because of some miracle that which they saw, and then would leave when truth was made known to them. They believed for a while, and in times of tribulations fall away. And they said to him, are we also blind? That is physically, yet they were spiritually blind. Let them alone. They are blind guides. Next, we see the Jews silenced. According to Augustine, this shows the meaning of the previous passage. That is, that our Lord was referring to spiritual blindness. He says, if you were blind, you would have no guilt because you would be running to the remedy. If you realized that you cannot see the center, then you would be asking for it humbly. But if you think that you actually have, that you are righteous, that you know God, even when you don't, then you're blind, and you're willfully blind. For sin is taken away. If you were blind, so he says, if you were blind, you would have no guilt because you would be running to the remedy. For sin is taken away by grace, which is given only to the humble. God gives grace to the humble. But now that you say we see, that is proudly thinking that you do see, you do not recognize that you are sinners, your guilt remains. That is not taken away. God opposes the proud. Here is another explanation. If you are blind, that is ignorant of the judgments of God and sacrament of the law, you would have no guilt. As if to say, if you were sinning out of ignorance, your sin would not be so serious. But now that you say we see, you arrogate to yourself an understanding of the law and a knowledge of God, and still sin, then your guilt remains and becomes greater. So this is again a profound point, that it's not about ignorance. There's nothing wrong in not knowing. It is because if you know that you don't know, then you are seeking. But if you claim that you know when you don't, then you are willfully blind. All right. So comments, go ahead and type exclamation mark. If you would like to share what your thoughts are. We'll start with Evanik, followed by Yogeshwar. Evanik.
Yeah, so from this one, I was thinking, just finding out where I started. So, when we talked about going against the sinner, and I was thinking of like you're going against your own nature, because when you sin, you're going against God, and if God is in you, you're going against what is inside of you. I can't remember writing for some reason. So when your eyes are fixed on the center, you notice is that when you're moving from the center, and then you can see it, and then you can correct it, right? If you see, because when you're going away from the center, it feels like you know something is off, and you want to figure out why something is off. So you're figuring out like, well, in what area of my life do maybe I need a shift, or I need to modify something? So you're asking yourself why, and then why are you moving away from the center? What are you focusing on in the periphery that maybe you don't need to be focusing on? And I think when you're proud, you have no reference point, right? You were saying before. And the humble is the awareness of you not being at the center. And when you're proud, you think you got it, right? You think you got it all. But I think pride is hiding the fact that you know you don't got it. right? And you just don't want to admit that you don't know. And I think that's where pride really comes in, because pride looks like, oh, this guy or this person thinks they know everything. But in reality, usually pride just holds this, just kind of says, I don't know. And you're trying to hide that fact. And I think when people take pride in the periphery, they're trying to look good for the world. Like that's what they're hiding. They want to look good. They want to look like they know everything. They want to be in power. They want to look powerful. They want to look like they got it. You know, you see this in celebrity culture. Like they just want to know, like they got it, that they're, you know, that they're the greatest. And, you know, that's what they're focused on. They're focused on what everybody thinks and their whole lives. And it really is a prison. When Jesus talks about in other passages of the Bible, he talks about sin being a prison. And it just clicked to me why that is. Because you're focused on other people and what they think of you and what you want them to think of you, instead of focusing how you want to be and choosing how you want to be. You're letting other people control how you are. So I think that's a good point. And then I wanted to point out on rituals. Rituals is definitely a form that is supposed to lead you to God. But sometimes those rituals become a God in and of themselves. And I think that's where God talks about idols and everything like that, because the rituals themselves can become an idol. You can forget what the function is. And the function is Jesus, and the function is God. And you forgot that because you got so wrapped up in doing it right and having the right answer and doing everything according to the law. I think just the last thing is that the problem with sin that you were talking about is that it is intentional. Like when you sin and you know you're going against the law of God, and when you sin, and I think that's what makes sin so detestable, is like you're turning away from God. And that's what the Pharisees were doing in a sense, right? They had God right there in their face performing miracles. And instead of saying, okay, I messed up, you know, I'm going to turn back to God, they turned further away. And they said, and they doubled down and they tried to find everything to convict him, because they knew, I think in some instances, they knew that they couldn't deny that he was God, but they tried anyway. And that's just intentionally turning from God. Like he did all these miracles and he did them and they still didn't believe. It's because they chose not to at that point. And they chose to find everything wrong with him, his lineage, where he came from, what he was about, that he's a liar, everything. So yeah, so I think that's the real thing, is that sin is intentional, and that pride is kind of like pretending like you have it when you really know that you don't.
Wonderful. I'll have more comments about the issue of kind of pride and love and the distinction between the two as I see it. But let's go with Yogeshwar, Joe, Katie, Becky, and Mike. Yogeshwar.
Yeah, actually, one of the points I wanted to make, Evanika's already made about pride. So there's two ways of looking at this. One is pride. The Pharisees were covered with pride. The other thing is the way we also understand some things. So we try to understand them like the Pharisees must have done. And it's stated in the text that they know that God has talked to Moses. But you see, in that sentence that they know that God has talked to Moses, they don't really know it. Because if they knew the essence of it, they would know God has talked to Jesus, like Jesus is God and all that. So we feel we know it. I don't know how to explain it, but sometimes we feel we know it, we have got it, we have struck the hammer on the head, but it's not it. That's what happens.
Wonderful, Yogeshwar. I mean, that's a great point, because this is a theme that that Jesus keeps coming back to. He says, look, if you're Abraham's children, you would be acting like him, and you would love God and you would love me. If you are actually following what Moses has taught you, you would not be doing this. So it is people who are taking something and then turning it into rituals. Relating to the point of the pride versus love, in the presentation that I did on the axis, and this is a core point in Indian philosophy, that they distinguish between the heart chakra, which is the love, which is your love for truth, goodness, as well as the world, as well as, so it's like God so loved the world. So the heart is your core is loving God and loving world at the same time. So that's and that's also Tattvamasi. So that's your Atma, that's the core of you. And you are basically loving the essence of you, your own spirit. That is at your center. Little bit away from it, like the way in which Indian yoga maps it, is that it's in the solar plexus. They call it that is like the pride or the ego. Or what it is that you're taking pride in the physical things that you have, your body, the books that you've read, your position in the society, and you're using that as a replacement, as the core of your being. You're identifying yourself with the external part of your life rather than the core of your spirit. So it is being proud of that versus being loving the core of who you are, of existence itself. And that's the distinction in Indian philosophy that I see. Next up is Joe, Katie, Becky, and Mike. Joe.
Yeah, so one of the things that you'd said that actually really struck, what's really impactful for me personally is, if you were sinning out of ignorance, then it would be okay. And that the ignorant person is seeking, right? That they know they're ignorant. And if you think about this and what that means, the ability to say, I don't know. And I've even been in many positions in my life where I haven't had that confidence. But if you have this belief and you're sincere, then you're okay with saying, I don't know. There's a certain comfort that comes with it, and you're open. And then what does that do? That means you're not prideful. So you're kind of abandoning yourself. And so I'm abandoning myself to God. I'm abandoning myself I'm seeking the wisdom. And so I think that that's something that is really impactful on a really practical level, where a lot of times it's okay to just say you don't know the answers, but that's faith, because then you have to make a leap of faith from there, because you don't necessarily have all the answers, but it's a belief, right? And once you believe, then you're much more at least open to the truth.
Wonderful. I want to give the example of the woman from Samaria. And I also want to connect it up with Arjun in Gita. Both these people, right? Like, for example, just before the chapter, in chapter 3, Pharisees were asking Jesus, okay, who are you? Tell us. And he was actually not telling them anything. But to this woman from Samaria, look at her entire approach, okay? she doesn't know much. On one hand, she's asking. Then she's telling Jesus what she knows. She said, oh, you're going to give me water, so I won't need to come to the well again. Okay, so not only that she doesn't know, but firstly, she's asking. She's saying, first, Jesus asks her for water. That's the first thing. And then she is willing to give that. Then she asks him questions. She tells him very openly what is there in her heart. He corrects it. So there is this back and forth. You see the same thing going on with Arjun and Krishna. Like Arjun, whenever he doesn't understand anything, whenever he thinks that there is a contradiction between what Krishna has said, he will call Krishna out. He will say, but you said this and you said that. I don't understand. This seems to be, why are you confusing me? But the whole underlying premise there is that they are seekers. They are taking the effort. They are asking, they're being honest. And if that is, you have that, then you can go towards the light. You don't necessarily need to, you can go towards the light. And that's the most important thing. Joe, you had something.
And it's the willingness to admit you're wrong as well. Like in that process, that's critical as well. And I really like the connection with the Gita that you just made. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Joe. Next up is Katie, followed by Becky. Katie.
I'm trying to tie it into my thoughts, but I was thinking about how I went to 1 year or a little bit less than 1 year of law school, and I remember they said like ignorance of the law is not a defense. You can't say, well, I didn't know, and that was interesting to me that was like in conflict with this. He was saying ignorance like lessens it for that. And I enjoyed Evanik's comment about idolatry, because the function, I think it helps also just like for us to like spell out the function is to worship God. And the rituals are the focus is kind of more like the self and making sure you're in line with. Well,
Katie, you're breaking up.
It's kind of without, and it can lose. Oh, sorry, my internet connection. I was saying that I feel like it does serve the function, but it's a somewhat robotic way of doing that you can lose the essence when serving the function.
Thank you. I want to clarify the point about ignorance. I think Gita, as well as the Bible, like, for example, in Gita, like if you're ignorant and if you are acting wrong, there are consequences, for sure. There are consequences. But the core thing is that it doesn't damn you. You still have the ability of fixing it and moving in the right direction. If you're moving in the wrong direction, you will move slowly. You will move in the opposite direction. But you always have the ability of saying, I screwed up. I repent for this, and to move in the right direction. And that openness to admitting that you're wrong. And when we do wrong things, it has consequences. But that doesn't change from the fact that no matter how wrong you are, no matter how ignorant you are, you have the capacity of changing, as opposed to people who think that they are right and who are holding on to that pretense, even in face of contradictions. They don't have this upward path. Next up is Becky, followed by Mike. Becky.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that ignorance piece as well. It's I think it's there are degrees of good, bad, better, and with ignorance, if you're ignorant and you know you're ignorant and you remain ignorant, that's foolish, and that is not good. But if you claim that you know, and intentionally remain, like in the case here, like the Pharisees intentionally clung to what was false when they should have known better, and they think they know better. Well, they're being held to a higher standard, and that condemns them in that that they intentionally chose to reject the truth. And but for someone who is ignorant but is humble, and humility is to see yourself accurately. It's not seeing yourself more, and it's not pretending that you are less. It's knowing where you stand, and to choose to move towards enlightenment, towards the truth. That is ideal. So it's true. Ignorance does not excuse you. Being naive does not remove you from the consequences of things that happen. And it's for Jesus to come and really point out all these flaws, and he's challenging people to move from ignorance. He's challenging people to go like, here are the facts, here's the concrete. Well, what's beyond that? Not just the laws that were spelled out to you. One step more. You ascend to understanding. You ascend from there to wisdom once you've experienced and you've really like immersed yourself in truth and you've lived it. And so with humility, it's a door that opens you up to, this is where I am. Now, where do I want to go? And it comes back down to, let me choose. I have to ask. I have to say, I want more, and not to remain ignorant or where I am. And to the point of pride, it's that pride is that inflation of yourself. So it moves you to be the center. And when you're at the center, you're limited and in your scope and your perception. And it leads to a fall because you don't see. But with humility, you move away. And going back to Jesus talking about like bringing that elevation to wisdom, it's take away all the concrete rules. What's the most important commandment? He didn't name like all of them, like the Pharisees would have wanted him to, right? It was the core, it was the message, it was the heart, and it was love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and love people as yourself. And when you love God, you have the right center, you can see yourself accurately. You can see yourself not any less. You don't, there's no self-condemnation, and not anymore through pride. and you are. And once you are, you can love people as yourself through that death and rebirth, because who you are is reborn in the spirit, and who you are is new life in Christ.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful points. I want to point out, I mean, this is, again, I'm coming from the Indian tradition here. The pride is that you're trying to take pride in something which is outside, which is something that you have already produced, something which is outside of you. So in some ways, kind of just flipping this story, being focused on the core of saying, I really want to be in the light, to be in the truth, to be righteous, to be, and that as much as I possibly can, that strong desire to be there in the center. On one hand, it is tremendously ambitious because you're saying that, you know, I love existence. I want that. I want that bliss. I want that truth. I want that. And that's what really, really matters. So that humbleness is actually an acknowledgement of the greatness which is possible for you. And that is so much higher than whatever it is that people take pride in. So in a very odd way, they are kind of pleased with just the trinkets that they have, whereas they're throwing away the real treasure. The way in which Nyaneshwar puts it was the commentary. It's like somebody's giving you a feast. You know, there is wheat and chaff, and you're throwing away the wheat and you're eating the chaff. So it's the outer covering that you're kind of coveting and focused on and taking pride in. But in the process, you're giving. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see all these texts kind of talking about the same thing in different ways. Next up is going to be Douglas, followed by Mike, Brian, JP, Endro, and Penny. Douglas.
Yeah. Jesus is the heart. And like Jaboski says, Dr. Jaboski, that there's two things. There's a move away from the heart or move away from love, or there's a move towards love. So when we realize that, you know, to move towards more love and understanding, and, you know, being able to realize, hey, I don't know, okay? Even Socrates says he didn't know. So when we realize it's not a weakness to say you don't know, it's probably best what he's saying in that is, I want you to understand these things, but if you tell me you know, I'm going to go away from you. So, and there people are getting, you know, shunned, and they're saying, gee, we don't know what to do, okay? Here's a person that knows, and they're afraid of him. And because of being afraid of him, they're not coming to him. And all he's saying is, understand the love that I'm giving you, okay? So that you'll come here and be with me, okay? And that's what he's pretty much trying to do. If you see it that way, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. Appreciate that. Next up is Mike.
Augustine also says that in his discussion of Isaiah 53, says there are 7 signs that that this is the Messiah that was said 700 years before Jesus. The Old Testament had a group of things that defined it as that the Messiah is going to have these attributes when he comes. Also, there's similar tie-ins to the Psalms of David. That's a poem that's set to music with a different kind of note scales that have some things. Now, among those 7 signs, blindness is one of the major ones. And it indicates And blindness is important, curing the blind, because it ties it back to Genesis. The first thing in God, in creating the universe, created light and separated it from dark. And that was it took almost a whole day to do that one thing. So the importance of blindness is there. Now, there have been other cases in the Bible where blindness was cured. But in fact, I think there's half a dozen of those kinds of cases. But and even Paul was struck blind on his path to Syria and was cured by his faith. But this is, it's important to note that blindness from birth represents an even higher level of curative power. So, and it's probably worth going through all 7, which we won't do right now, and where they came from and why the Old Testament and the Pharisees were really important on this kind of exegesis as to why it's said that this guy is going to come and what his thing is. And Augustine calls this the golden passional, as this reason for proving that the Old Testament states he's going to come and he's going to have these attributes. So
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. So if you have time at the end of this, I would like to ask you about Augustine's commentary and how it differs from Aquinas Commentary, and what is it that Augustine does amazingly well, because Aquinas refers to Augustine multiple times in his commentary, but I have not read Augustine's commentary myself. I did it for like 1 or 2 chapters, but I would appreciate your comments on that. So next up is going to be Brian. Brian, go ahead.
So I have a couple of comments. One is just a comment that supports this different modes of knowing, different ways of knowing, that through personal experience or reading and tradition. The other is kind of goes on a slightly different topic from what we've been discussing, and that is that the mission of Jesus was to a great extent helping the disadvantaged, the poor, and the rest, and that's emphasized by this passage here, also chapter 5, healing the sick, and also where a lot of his ministry happens. Chapter 5 happened at the pools of Bethesda, which is that's a synagogue on the edge of Jerusalem, and then this happened here in Shalom, is a different pool, but the synagogues had a pool outside for ritual cleaning, and sometimes were used for healing or people who wanted to be healed. So they would tend to collect there, and healing was a part of the mission of the synagogue. So Jesus did work at the synagogues, as did others. He wasn't so much focused on the temple. He did go to the temple. We talked about that in chapters 7 and 8. That was really quite an event, but for the festivals of the tabernacles. But he went a lot to the synagogues and worked in the mikvah, where people would go for ritual cleaning and hopefully for healing. This particular Shalom was rediscovered by archaeologists, I think in 2019. So this is just very, people are still discovering very recently things about this. This was a gathering place where people went when they were looking for healing. So again, Jesus would go there. It probably was not next to a synagogue, but again, it's a place where people gathered for healing. And I just wanted to point that out because an important part of his ministry, in addition to, if you will, the more the more confrontational approaches in the temple, he had a very different approach in the synagogues. It was a more healing, helping, curing approach in the synagogues, and that's really where his mission tended to be centered.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, the general point that the general message that I get throughout is that, firstly, it is universal, that this is open to anybody. So this woman from Samaria, it doesn't matter where you're from. Secondly, it is open to anybody whose heart is open. So whether this is, again, a woman in a very low status of the society, who's looked down upon by others, doesn't matter. Person who is blind doesn't matter. Person who is lame doesn't matter. It's all about whether they say yes to the truth in their own heart. And then the whole, kingdom of heaven is open to them. So it's a very profound way, and it's a profound message. And he's saying that, he's explicitly saying that people who are using the rituals, who have a high status in the society, by that means alone, it's not going to get you there. You need this internal transformation to get there. Next up is going to be JP, Andrew, and Penny. JP.
Okay, thank you. This morning, I was looking at this very famous painting by Caravaggio, David and Goliath. So just describe it a little bit. David standing in the center, standing in the light, as it were, right in the center. In his left hand, he's holding the head of Goliath, who's on the periphery, I guess you could say. And in his right hand is the sword. And the kind of little secret to that painting is there's a few letters etched on that sword that has been interpreted as saying humilitas occidit superbium, which means humility kills pride. So I brought that up just because it seems this lesson is as old as the Bible itself, and it keeps repeating over and over. And you figure these learned Pharisees would be very well versed in this lesson, and it should be really something that they should grasp through and through, but they keep missing the point. And I think that's part of it. Like, we keep missing the point of that, and we have to relearn this lesson over and over. And this leads me to, I think, the general point of how God is working through this, which is, like, ironically, the learned are the most ignorant, the blind who see the best, the low become high. And so that's kind of the message that's going through this. And there's also this subversion of epistemology, where this the real knowledge is being dispensed by Jesus, and it gives primacy to that this instead of written laws, to what Jesus is saying. And I think that goes back to, why didn't Jesus write anything down? And there's more power in what Jesus is saying to say to this blind person, and it actually instills a greater belief, because there's a lot of nuance that's in like face-to-face communication versus written, where it's very dry what's written, and you have it's kind of limited. It's good in some ways, but it's bad in other ways. But when you're face-to-face with Jesus, when he says something, it's much more, it's important than just those mere words. So I had a couple more things to say, but it's basically just that this inversion of epistemology, the irony that keeps running through and through. And I think Joe mentioned that, why can't, say, these Pharisees admit they don't know or admit mistakes? And I think that when you get a power structure like that becomes established, that's you're kind of like paid, or your authority is based on your knowledge. So as soon as you admit you're wrong or you don't know, you're kind of now eroding that. Like you're kind of now, people say, well, if you don't know, well, maybe I'll go to somebody else who does it. So you're kind of almost paid to know whether it's right or wrong, but you have to state a position, whether it's incorrect or not. So that's it. Thank you, Shrakan.
Thank you, JP. I really like that point about written and oral, because what happens is that written is something that is more stable, but it can very easily become ritualized. It becomes, the idea that was behind what was written and the function of that can be lost. And people keep on focusing on just the form of it. And what he's doing is that in his speech, he's bringing back the entire context of the inner spirit. Now, the beautiful thing is that, some friends of mine who are very familiar with the Old Testament, they can see, they can demonstrate these things that are pointing to Jesus throughout the Old Testament. So many of the themes are there. What Jesus and what the New Testament does is that it concentrates them and internalizes them in a very powerful way. And I think showing them in the person of Jesus, that is huge, as opposed to laws. You see, look at the contrast between saying, okay, these are the laws that I have to follow, where you're saying, if I don't follow the law, I will get into trouble. So I'm afraid to transgress the law, therefore I will obey the law. That is one way, one kind of motivation. The second kind of motivation is the positive motivation of love for the character of Jesus. Say, look at this person. Look at this person. And the love you feel, it's a far more holistic, positive. It goes across spirit, emotion, reason, physical action, all in one. And that is being presented in the New Testament, which is incredibly powerful way of presenting deep thought. Thank you, JP. Next up is Andrew, followed by Penny. Andrew.
We have, we're finding that throughout all our previous readings, previous chapters in John, just about every chapter, we find the dichotomy between that which is knowledge as attained through empirical evidence, that is through our sensories, our physical senses, and having belief in something that is more profound, that there is such a thing as a core, that we each have a spirit to attend to. And I think the interaction between the Pharisees and Jesus is very much displayed by this dichotomy. The Pharisees want evidence. They want to say, well, listen, all we have is your word that you're saying the truth, that you are of your Father, and you've spoken to us of your Father. So to paraphrase, I'm not quoting exactly, of course, but I'm giving the meaning in several of the passages from chapter 8. For instance, when it's talking about the light, the Pharisees say, well, our father is Abraham. And so what do you mean by your father and so forth? Jesus tries to say, well, if you believed my words, you would know what I was talking about, but there's a certain requirement for faith in what he's saying in order to find it credible. And I think this is a problem with modern man, with modern humans to quite an extent, especially the scientific objective methodology is to focus only on empirical evidence, on the evidence from the physical senses, and to discount anything that is subjective. But it's precisely the subjective things that we're finding very important and essential in that is emphasized in not in St. John's Gospel, but in the Bhagavad Gita, and it also in the Tao Te Ching, that the subjective aspect, and as a matter is every bit as important, maybe perhaps more important than the aspect of what we can see from the physical, from merely the physical space-time phenomenon.
Wonderful. Let me comment on that. Let me connect it to kind of larger themes that we are looking at. Another way of putting it is that the modern Western mind is focused on the external,
yes,
the outside. Whereas if you look at Tao Te Ching, if you look at Bhagavad Gita, and if you look at the New Testament, it's focused on the inside, the inner and the outer. And you need both inner and the outer. And so
yes.
that's that. Yeah, I see it like that. And one of the things, okay, so that's it. Please go ahead. Okay. Next up is Penny.
Okay, I just wanted to go back briefly, about the issue of the proud people and the humble people, because I was reading Gita today, and there's a section on it that was so much like what we were talking about that I just wanted to read a couple little sentences from it. He's talking about people with divine tendencies, which would be the humble people, and people with demonic tendencies, which are the proud people. And describing the proud people, like he says here, I am a ruler of men. I enjoy the things of, this is the proud person talking. I enjoy the things of this world. I am successful, strong, and happy. Who is my equal? I am so wealthy and so nobly born. I will sacrifice to the gods. I will give alms. I will make merry. This is what they say to themselves in the blindness of their ignorance. They are addicts of sensual pleasure, made restless by their many desires and caught in the net of delusion. They fall into the filthy hell of their own evil minds, conceited, haughty, foolishly proud, and intoxicated by their own wealth. They only sacrifice to God in name only for outward show without following the sacred rituals. These malignant creatures are full of egoism, vanity, lust, wrath, and consciousness of power. They loathe me and deny my presence both in themselves and in others. So I was just really struck when I read this morning, by what a description. It seems so modern for one thing. But that's just what we're saying with the Pharisees. They're focusing on themselves. They're rulers. They're nobles, and they're making sacrifices, but not with the spiritual sacrifice, not in the true sense. So
that was wonderful. It's so amazing. So nice to see you and so many of us kind of diving into Bhagavad Gita, and you can see the power of it and the eloquence of it and its ability to capture so much complex. And as you said, it seems very much modern in this that it speaks, you can kind of see these people actually, you can, you have seen these people, and so it's wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Becky.
I really liked what you said about love. And it makes me think of the approach that the Pharisees were taking the whole time, it's so focused on the law, the law, the law. They come to God by following the law, or else you'll be punished, or these are the consequences if you do not. And it's out of fear. They're driving in fear, fear into people in order for them to come to God. But Jesus doesn't do that. He appeals to people through love. And here it's a return to, like, it's an elevation, because it's not these laws that are necessarily bad, but it's just leading back to the function that it's all about love. And that's what he's doing through his acts, which challenges the Pharisees of their understanding of the law, that it's through love that he's doing all this, and it's not actually counter to the law at all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. Next up is Brian.
Since there've been there's a lot of talk about the different modes of knowing and understanding, and focusing on the external and internal understanding and expressing it. I just want to note that at the end of Thomas Aquinas's career, he recognized the inadequacy of words to express his understanding or relationship with the center or with God. Here's I knew about this, but I just looked it up. I can read it. On the 6th December, 1273, another mystical experience took place. While he was celebrating Mass, he experienced an unusually long ecstasy. Because of what he saw, he abandoned his routine and refused to write anymore. When Reginald, his secretary, begged him to get back to work, Thomas replied, "Reginald, I cannot, because all I have written seems like straw to me." And as a result, his remaining writings remain unfinished.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So continuing my argument against Joe about my inability to summarize, I'm going to give you a preview of the next 3 meetups coming up. If I was doing that yesterday, I should have said about the meetup coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to be starting up on the chapter 6, which is about Dhyan Yoga. What is Dhyan? It's basically developing your ability to concentrate on your center, on your core, on the spiritual axis. It is a training. It is a practice of how do you learn to keep focused on the center. If I were to talk about this meetup of tomorrow today, I would say it is the same issue. It's a question of how do you see the center instead of being distracted by the lights in the periphery and losing the focus on the sun, which is within you. That's what, and how do you develop the practice of doing that? Actually, the Indian philosophy has the entire meditation, concept of meditation is about that. So that's what we're starting out tomorrow. If I were to talk about the meetup coming up on Saturday at 11 o'clock, it's going to be Mark Stallman, who's going to be talking about how to be an autodidact. Now, do you realize how ridiculous it is that we are talking, I'm so excited about this, about autodidact? Look at the state of the culture, that people think it's an unusual thing. All learning comes from within. It's your curiosity. And you have to learn yourself. All your learning happens that way. Whereas by default, the non-autodidacts are basically absorbing the forms of knowledge. An autodidact is through their own exercise of function, of curiosity, and of thinking, creating the knowledge through that. So that's how we are going to be talking. That's what we're going to be talking about on Saturday. And if I were to describe the Sunday meetup yesterday, in terms of it is going to be on the new spirituality for the future. It is exactly about that. Spirituality. What is spirituality? It is being true to your own spirit, which is your function. And in the future, in the technological age, means when things around you are changing as they are transforming, we are living in an incredibly prosperous, fast-changing world. This meetup is about it's about spirit, about function of us, and how do you keep that alive and active in that world. So that's how I would have done if I was fast enough, Joe.
We're always improving, but you still apply it very, very quickly.
Okay, no.
It's an evolutionary process.
So anyway, but folks, these meetups are incredible. I'm telling you, I'm just delighted to have Mark Stallman back. I'm delighted to have Yasuhiko back. Yasuhiko is doing weekly meetups, not weekly, sorry, monthly meetups. And then Mark Stallman is about to start a course starting end of February, another 8-week course. So we're working on that. So it's really, really exciting. The Gita meetups are going to keep going up because I've been reading Naneshwari. I finished all 36 hours of listening to Naneshwari. And the commentaries are just incredible. So really, really looking forward to it. And I'm just delighted how deeply so many of you are getting into Gita, because for me, I don't know what it is. I don't have a very good perspective, but I'm just full of Gita. Like I see, because it is very, I love the Bible. I love the Tao Te Ching. But Gita, I find that it's the distinctions it is making are far more sophisticated. The thing is that it's very carefully distinguishing between these are the various paths. So just the path of what we are studying in 6th chapter, Dhyana Yoga. How do you concentrate? How do you keep attention on what you need to keep attention on? How do you direct your mind? And that's a profound topic. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about. So just delighted. Let's see. I wanted to talk to Mike now. Mike, can I ask you a few questions? Mike, don't tell me you've disappeared.
No, you know a lot about computers, and there's something called the IRQ interrupts.
But let's not talk about IRQ interrupts.
When I hit that unmute key,
okay.
it doesn't unmute because Mike, Microsoft, in its wisdom, did not give that key a separate interrupt.
Got it. I'm sorry. I thought you were going to talk about interrupts, so I had to interrupt you. So let me tell you first. Let me ask you first. Tell me about your reading of Augustine's commentary. What do you see?
Brian Nelson made a comment that they both recanted a lot of their exegesis stuff in their old age. And even though the popes have said, Pope Benedict, some number, I think the 15, said that Aquinas was the best scholasticism interpreter of all of this stuff. So now I don't understand the difference between what modern people say about Aquinas,
No, forget about
Isaiah.
Them. Yeah, no. Okay. I mean, I just want to, because so firstly, I have read a few commentaries. I chose some topics. I chose some chapters of John and read Aquinas' commentary and Augustine's commentary. And I think Aquinas does a fantastic job, because I read his chapters and I've read the same chapters in Augustine, and I found that Aquinas has actually incorporated most of the key parts of the greatest things that Augustine had to say into his commentary. So
I agree with that. And the differences are the real differences are for a real scholar in this thing rather than for me.
Sure.
I can accept. I mean, they both talk about that the Old Testament predicted in much detail that exactly how the Gospels are going to be put together, what Jesus is going to do to show that he's really the Messiah.
Let me ask you one more question about the Gospel of John. See, I really, really love Gospel of John. I have read the whole Testament now, but Gospel of John just stands out to me as being, on one hand, most deeply philosophical, on the other hand, just beautiful, beautiful writing. The other thing is that it's so concise. It's just so powerful. It goes from like these amazing stories, very simple stories, to the deepest principles, and does that just, in an instant. What do you think of the Gospel of John in relationship to the rest of the New Testament?
Boy, that's pretty complicated. I will say that the Gospel of John was written later than most of the other books.
Mm-hmm.
And it was written in a period of time when they had plagues in Rome, and they were blaming the Christians for these plagues, and they were going, and the Caesars of the time were trying to had started to say, we got to get rid of all these Christians. And of all people, Marcus Aurelius conspired with one of the scholars to create a gospel that was a little less hard on the Romans. And Irenaeus is that guy's name. And so they don't, the question is to, and I think we've talked about, and you had this guy, Brian Terry here, who is a scholar in this stuff.
No, are you talking about the Gospel of John or some other?
Gospel of John.
Okay, got it.
And actually there were 50 major different Gospels, and and they condensed them down to 4 in what we've got. And what we've got may not be the ones that they had back in that time. And of course, they were all written after hundreds of years after the death of Jesus.
Got it. All right, folks. this was wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will see you soon. Don't miss Gita. And don't miss this weekend, both those meetups, 11 a.m. meetups, 11 a.m. On Saturday is Mark Stallman on how to be an autodidact. And 11 a.m. on Sunday is Yasuhiko Kimura on new spirituality. So wonderful. Any final comments, anybody? Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. I think that'll
Bye.
explain everything we've been trying to talk about.
You. Love you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Bye. Bye, everybody. See you.
Ready? Next.